Welcome back. A little bit of a new technology. I'm having trouble uploading these to YouTube in any kind of timely manner, and I'm seeing if this will work any better. When last we spoke, we were talking about giving away free copies. Not a big deal here. The only thing you can give away for free in the publishing agreement is sheet music. That won't amount to much. Not much harm there. But just be aware that anytime you are in an agreement where somebody can distribute some of your material free, and then that's non-royalty bearing to you, it could be very, very, very damaging. In a record deal, it sometimes deprived artists of millions of dollars because of the funny ways in which record labels would give away free material. So please be wary of that. There's another provision in here, in the royalty provision, that says you'll get your percentage of royalties if you co-write something in accordance with an equal share, unless they are notified otherwise. That's probably perfectly fine. The last provision of that royalty section is a little, I like to call it catch-all provision. And what it says is, except as herein expressly provided, no other royalties or money shall be paid to writer. You should always remove something like that, because in playing the what-if game, there could be some royalties or forms of exploitation that are not envisioned or contemplated at the time of the agreement. And if that new technology or form of income arises and that provision is there, you will not share in that income at all with the songwriter. So when people were participating in money from movies, when videotape came out, they shared none of that money because that wasn't envisioned and somebody had that kind of provision there. In this agreement, it does mention streaming, but you can imagine an agreement 30 years ago that didn't say anything about streaming. It just said you get mechanical income, and you get performance income, and you get sync income, and nothing else with that catch-all provision. And then streaming comes along, and you wouldn't be able to share in that income. So always strike what I call those catch-all provisions, and in fact, turn it on its head and say, except as if there's something that's not mentioned in here, I will share in that income 50%. So the catch-all should actually go the other way. All right, finally, I want to talk a little bit about advances received by a publisher. That is, not the advances that are payable to the writer by the publisher, but advances that are received by the publisher from third parties. Generally speaking, under the language of this agreement and most agreements, writers are not entitled to share in those advances. And publishers will justify this by saying, the circumstances under which we receive advances are, we make a sub-publishing deal. So I make a deal with a publishing company in Japan for them to represent our catalog. They pay me $100,000 in an advance against the income that they're going to earn over there. There's no way I could share that with my writers. I can't divide it evenly between the writers or the number of compositions because I don't know which songs will actually earn money over there. And that's what triggers my obligation to pay the writer. So it could be I have 3 writers or 3 songs, and I license them to a German sub-publisher. They give me $100,000. If I gave each one of those writers or songs $33,000 and change, and then the Japanese sub-publisher exploits this material and only one song earns money, and it's a whole $100,000, I'm going to owe $50,000 to one of those writers and nothing to the other 2. They didn't earn anything, but they received over $30,000. So it doesn't make sense because those materials are going to be cross-collateralized from the point of view of the sub-publisher. I know this is complicated. I'm just saying it. I'm not going to test you on it. So what do you do in that situation? Number one, what you do is you try to get that provision that I said earlier in the agreement, no block licenses. That way your stuff is never licensed with other material that receives a lump sum advance that you don't know who it's attributable to. So you say no block licenses without my approval, and then secondarily you say I shall receive a portion of the publisher's advances if that advance is solely attributable to my material. So if they license one of my songs for a sub-publishing deal, or one of my songs for a video game, the new Animal Crossing, and they receive a $100,000 advance against 10 cents per copy that's going to be earned, I get my share of that $100,000. So that works. All right, so in the case of advances, here's what you need to know. Generally speaking, writers do not share in advances received by the publisher. You can get around that with enough bargaining power if you can, number one, say you can't do any block licensing without my approval, or number two, say that writers shall share in advances received by the publisher from a third party in the event that those advances are solely attributable to my material. Think about that one for a little while. All right? So that's it. That's enough about royalties. I know you probably have questions on that. We will figure out how to get some questions to you, from you, to you, and answer them all as a group. Or however, I'm thinking of Zooming soon. You'd like to Zoom? All right. Related to the money issue is not only how much do you earn, but how the heck and when the heck do I get paid? And that's contained in the next section, which is accounting. And every agreement is going to have an accounting section which describes when, how often someone's going to be paid, and then includes some audit rights, which are very important as well. The ability of the writer to go and make sure they're being paid accurately and honestly. In this agreement, as you correctly noted in your summaries, this is pretty traditional, though about to change, and changing right now. And that is that generally speaking, writers under publishing agreements and recording artists under recording agreements historically have been paid on a semi-annual basis. That means they get paid twice a year. That's the frequency. They get 2 checks per year. And then when do they get the checks? Well, in this agreement, as is standard historically, they get paid, that payment is due 90 days after the end of the accounting period. So most accounting periods are calendar. So the first accounting period will go from January till the end of June. So you get paid one time for that 6-month period, and then another period begins July 1st or thereabouts and ends December 31st, and you get paid for any income that was generated by the publisher during that period. When do you get paid? You get paid under this agreement 90 days after the close of that period. So if it's June 30th, which is the close of the first semi-annual period, that check will be due to you 3 months later. 3 months later. So that's according to my calculations. July, August, September 30th. So is that right? July, August, September. Wake me up when September ends and there should be a check in my mailbox. Now I'm going to tell you this is historically the way it's been done at almost every company. It needs to change. There was a time when accounting, and it still is, accounting is a bit of a headache and a bit complicated. It certainly was complicated in the paper age, where people were dealing with paper and adding pieces of paper up with an adding machine and checking them and storing them and cross-referencing them. Very time-consuming, very complicated systems in place that to force somebody to account more frequently or more quickly was really onerous. Let's feel a little bit sorry for the publishing company. So this was appropriate. However, nowadays in the digital age, these things are much easier. Still cause a lot of headaches. It's a problem whenever that accounting time and checks and all that kind of stuff. It still is complex because mistakes can be made and there's miscommunication, so it still is complicated. But certainly those time periods that are contained in this agreement are outdated. And so in negotiating these agreements, in time, you should be shortening these periods. And it's difficult to say with which company and how quickly this will happen, but certainly the pressure of companies like BMG and Cobalt, which promise this very rapid, transparent accounting, is moving it to be quicker and more frequent. So at the very least, I would say you should be able to go from semi-annual accounting to quarterly accounting very, very easily without much negotiation at all. And you should get paid within 30 to 45 days after the end of that quarterly period. So instead of waiting till June for the period to end and the check to come September 30th, you'd get paid every quarter, which is January, February, March. At the end of March triggers the end of the period, and then 30 to 45 days after that, so that you get paid at the end of April or the middle of May. So at the very least, at some point, it should be monthly, within a week or two. And I'm telling you, if we haven't discussed this in class before and seen some of the things that people like Cobalt are doing, that the accounting will be virtually instantaneous at some point. So there should be no time periods in here. When the publishing company receives $100,000 for a fee to sync something up, when they receive royalties from Spotify for number of plays your stuff has received, your share should be calculated and paid and deposited. I mean, you should be sitting there like this, da, 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 ching, and you'll feel it. Oh my God, I just got paid because they just licensed something for $100,000. So honestly, technology and companies like Cobalt and BMG are going to make accounting be virtually instantaneous. But right now, we're at the 6 months, 60 to 90 days after that. It should be moved relatively soon to quarterly, 30 to 45 days after that, monthly, and eventually get to instantaneous. So if you were provided with this section on accounting, which is the next section right after royalties, paragraph 9, that's what you'd do. You'd go for more frequent accounting periods. It also says that those statements and that payment is binding upon you if you don't make some objection within, I don't know, all agreements are different, within all royalty statements rendered by publisher to writer shall be binding upon writer and not subject to any objection by writer unless they send notice within 1 year of the date they receive the statements. That means I get my statement on September 30th. It says I get royalties for this and this and that. And then I have a year to say, hey, you didn't pay me accurately or honestly here. And if I don't object to anything at that point, by that point, then I am foreclosed from ever objecting again. So if I find out a year and a half later that they got something in mind in the new Avengers movie, and I was due $100,000, but I just didn't discover it until a year and a half later, I am foreclosed from objecting to it. Can't sue them for it. So what you should do in those situations is have that period be, you can usually get 2 years without even blinking an eye. Make that 2 years. I would suggest 3 years or no limitation at all. That is, there are limitations built into the law. We call them statutes of limitation that give you a period of time which is fair for you to be able to find out and object to something. And those, it's usually around 3 years, but it could be longer and there's some nuance to it. So I would try to get that limitation out of there entirely. But at the very least, it should be 2 years you have to object, and really it should be 3. So I would mark that out like that, all right? Finally, there are audit rights that are contained in every agreement where you're paid royalties that give you the ability to go in to the publishing company and rifle through their stuff and making sure they're paying you accurately and honestly. So this right should be included in every agreement. There are various points, this one isn't bad, but there are various points that you need to pay attention to there, such as when can you audit? Sometimes we'll put parameters as to certain times that make it inconvenient for you to audit. How often you can audit? Can you audit once a year, twice a year? It is a rather intrusive process, so some of these things are legitimate. You can't come and audit me every week. You know, you can't do it in the middle of the night because we got to be there to watch you. So some of these limitations are appropriate, and you just got to make sure whether they're reasonable. Who can audit? Sometimes they say just a CPA because they know what they're doing. Sometimes they say a CPA that's not involved in an audit for somebody else, so they don't get writers teaming up and hiring one CPA because they're very expensive. I would get something like that added there. How far back you can go and look at books and records. Sometimes what you can actually look at, it's not that critical here, but in record company deals, sometimes they wouldn't let you look at manufacturing records to make sure that you were being paid for everything that was being sold, because it would be a really easy calculation to see as a recording artist whether you're being paid for everything. This is how many were manufactured, this is how many we have in our warehouse, and so this many were sold. So the accounting should say that, but record companies would never let you look at that. So make sure that you can audit reasonable times, reasonable places, with reasonable people, all that sort of stuff. Make sure the restrictions are not too burdensome on you. And then finally, you should make sure that there's some penalty for them not paying you accurately and honestly. And that is one of the reasons people don't pay accurately and honestly in any business, is that that's all they're ever going to owe you. I owe you $10,000, come get it, come sue me for it. All you're going to get is $10,000. Maybe I should only pay you $3 and you just go away. So there's got to be some penalty to somebody not paying you. And so if possible, what you should build in there is number one, that they pay you any interest at a specific rate for any amounts that were underpaid, and that they also pay the cost of the audit. That if I audit you and it turns out you underpaid me by X amount, usually there's a percentage amount that triggers this, that they underpaid you, that they are responsible for the cost of the audit. And those sorts of penalties will encourage people to pay accurately and honestly, because then there is a disadvantage to not paying accurately and honestly. The cost of that goes up. So having penalties built into there is really, really important. Finally, just to go back, I think I missed this stuff about non-payment breaches, that is. So here's the scenario. Let's say the publishing company owes you a check on September 30th, and you go to your mailbox and you see, hey, whoa, the mailbox is empty. There's no check in there. Have they breached the agreement? You should know that a breach of an agreement is when somebody doesn't live up to their obligations, and then a court will enforce that agreement. You can go into court if somebody's breached, and they can enforce that agreement, and they can assess penalties on that person for not living up to their side of the bargain. So the breach of the agreement is what triggers the ability of a writer to sue the publisher in this particular instance. So if that check is due September 30th, I open it, it's not there. I go back the next day, October 1st. I don't know why I have to oil my mailbox. It's not there. I go back October 15th, it's still not there. Are they in breach? Are they in breach? I call them and I say, hey, I haven't received my check. They say, oh, I'm sorry, we had a little glitch here. I'm sorry, it's sitting somewhere. We'll get it to you in the next week. And a week goes by, I still haven't gotten it to me. Are they in breach? Can I sue them? The answer is no. Because in this contract where you can create your own little world and anything's possible, you can see that there's a paragraph about breaches. That is paragraph something. I have it right here. Paragraph 18. And if you read that paragraph over, it's quite interesting. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But what it says is that the publisher is not in breach of any particular provision unless you send them notice. That is a formal notice saying, hey, you've breached this, you haven't lived up to your obligation. And then the publishing company has some period of time, here it's 60 days, to cure that breach. That is to make good on their obligation. Or if it's not capable of being cured or lived up to within 60 days, at least they've started to cure that breach within 60 days. So they're not in breach unless first you notify them, and then they haven't cured the breach within some period of time. So a couple of ways that you'd negotiate this particular provision, any kind of breach provision, which generally does exist in these agreements, is number one, I would make this provision mutual. I mean, if they're not in breach until I notify them and give them a chance to make it right, I should have that same opportunity, that I'm not in breach until they notify me and I have a chance to make it. So number one, make it mutual. Number two, those time periods are way too long, way too long. First of all, I'd get that thing out about not being able to cure within 60 days. I'd ask them, I'd say, what kind of breach is not capable of being taken care of within 2 months? As a matter of fact, the one obligation that the publisher really has under this agreement is that they have to pay you advances, royalties, all sorts of stuff. So non-payment is the most likely claim of breach here that a writer would have against a publisher. How long does it take if the publishing company is solvent and not going bankrupt? How long does it take a publishing company to cure that breach? Not very long. They just have to write a check and give it to you. So I would shorten that period from 60 days. I would have it be 30 days or less, and then I would even have it be less if the breach that is being alleged is non-payment. Maybe they just have 5 days to cure that breach, because I don't want to be associated with somebody who's not paying me when I'm supposed to be paid. Got to get paid. So in seeing this paragraph, and I'll show it to you all marked up, 3 ways in which you would amend it is, number one, you would make it mutual, so the writer has the same ability to cure a breach. Number two, get rid of that language that just allows them to start curing a breach within the time period. And then thirdly, shorten the cure period, the time in which the publisher has the ability to make good on their obligation. make it shorter and shorter still when the breach alleged is non-payment. So maybe they have normally 30 days, normally 30 days to cure a breach. In the case of non-payment, 5 business days, 10 days, something like that. So you get your money. All right. Demos. This will be our last thing. As I said, publishing agreements, you don't need to be concerned too much about recoupment. You should always be concerned about it because the major expense that is being recouped from you is the personal advances that are going into your pocket. You always want those to be as big as possible because you're just getting paid early. That's all that is. That's a nice thing. There might be some miscellaneous things that they try to recoup from you, specifically in an agreement they didn't hear, marketing costs, other things. I would shy away from that. Nowadays, a lot of publishers are being asked to kick in money to radio promotion to get records up the chart because their income increases and record companies are looking to lower their costs. So that might be something. If there's something in there like that, it should be subject to approval or caps or limits because that could get dangerous. You could start to get into the record industry world where there's all sorts of things being recouped from you and you never see any money. But the most common other thing besides personal advances that is definitely going to be in every agreement is demo costs. That they're going to try to make a demo cost for, whatever records they're trying to plug and exploit. And they want to recoup part of this expense. Since they're sharing income with you 50-50, they think it's appropriate that they share those expenses with you 50-50. So, generally speaking, demo costs are 50% recoupable from the writer. That is, if $1,000 is spent on a demo, 500 of that will be eaten by the publisher. 500 of that goes into the recoupment balance along with the personal advances that will be repaid from the writer's royalties that are earned. So $500. That really doesn't make much sense. At some point that might be different. It should be maybe an expense that the publisher absorbs themselves, especially since in the rest of the paragraph it says they own the masters, the demos that are made, and you're not entitled to any money if they happen to exploit those demos, which sometimes happens. I think I played for you some Warner Brothers demos that were released actually as records, that as sung by the writers. And with this agreement that we have here, they would be paid no money for that whatsoever. So someday it will be that either the publisher foots the whole cost, or that if you're going to pay 50% of the cost, that you as the songwriter own half of it and are entitled to any kind of half of any kind of income that might be earned from it. So we'll see. There might also be a problem with respect to the way that these demo costs are recouped. You will see in some agreements that in order to ensure that the demo costs are kept at a minimum, that it will say demo costs are recoupable 50% from the writer up to a certain amount, $1,000, and then any overage, anytime a demo costs more than $1,000, the writer is responsible for the entire 100%, whatever that excess or overage, that's what we call it, overage, is incurred in making that demo. I would run away from that provision unless I, as the writer, were the one who was responsible for making the demo. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are the ones that are responsible. If they are, and a lot of people have that equipment and they make beats and they record the demo right when they're actually creating the song. So in those circumstances, where the writer is responsible for the costs it will add up to make a demo, then it might be appropriate to put in that provision where they are responsible 100% for overage. But typically that's not the case. And so there's no reason for that to occur. But you will see it in lots of agreements. And be aware of just how onerous that can be. So I'm going to give you a problem there too with a little worksheet. So if it is where it says the writer is responsible for 50% of the demo costs up to $1,000 and then 100% of whatever is spent in excess of that, how would a calculation go? Well, it would be something like this. Let's say a demo costs $2,000 with that contractual provision I just said to you. If the demo costs $2,000 and the writer is responsible for generating that cost, $1,000 of that will be split 50-50, $500 with the publisher and $500 with the writer. and then the excess, 1,000, will be totally borne by the writer. So another $1,000, making a total of $1,500. So you can see how that could be pretty bad. I have run into circumstances where publishers were trying to make a video to appeal to a certain artist to record, and then they changed their mind, changed to another artist, didn't get the demo right, didn't think it was attractive enough for the magnitude of the artist that they were doing it, and the demo cost somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. If something like that occurred in an agreement that was written, as I said, where the writer's responsible for overage, even though they weren't responsible for incurring that overage, they would be paying virtually the entire cost of a $20,000 demo. That would not be right. So just keep those considerations in mind. See if we're ever going to move from this sharing the cost 50-50. If we do move from the, being 50-50, that'd be great. Nothing more to worry about with recoupment. If we keep it at 50-50, we got to start to think about, if I'm paying half the cost, I should be entitled to half of the ownership of this recording and entitled to half the income that's generated from this recording. Because remember, it says earlier in that catch-all provision, unless we mention other income being accruable to you, it's not going to be paid. And even if they exploit these demos, you shan't receive a penny. All right, that's it. I think I got maybe 2 or 3 more lectures on this, so stay tuned, take your time, take down any questions that you might have about me being unclear about something, and be aware we are going to have some worksheets that kind of go through some of the numbers and some of the markups that I've been doing just orally here. All right, you take care. We can change my shirt for the next one. Ta-ta.